How do you measure happiness?
First, let's define happiness. We have done this in a previous episode, but it is LSD. That is Lakshmi, Saraswati, Durga. L represents material wealth, S represents intellectual, and D represents emotions. What can you measure is L. This is measurable.
Right.
S is partially measurable, and D is not measurable at all.
Right.
So happiness is a combination of some things that can be measured and some things which is wealth.
Some things that can partially be measured, which is intellect or knowledge.
Knowledge, like your training programs, your qualifications that you've got. But what cannot be measured is the emotional quotient. You do try, but you will never, I mean, how do you measure who needs attention and who doesn't need attention? And you know, sometimes happiness is a function of how much attention you get.
Right.
So once you recognize that happiness is a combination of measurable and not measurable, and also what I consider how much money is good enough for me and how much money is good enough for you.
I was just going to bring that. Even there is this subjective element of, you know, how much wealth is enough, right?
And how much wealth is enough is, I mean, should a CEO get 1 crore, 2 crores, 5 crores, 10 crores? Let's check out. Let's find out what is the right measurement for all CEOs. And everybody will say, you know, the measuring scale for me is different from the measuring scale for you. Because see, I am different. And you see, since every human being is unique, everybody has their own unique measurement scale. And that's what Ganesha was trying to tell us. One day, Indra wanted to measure how great he was, and he wanted proof, he wanted to show the world how great he was, which means he wanted something tangible and objective. So he called Vishwakarma, his architect, and said, build a palace for me. And Vishwakarma built a palace of gold for him. And Indra looked at it and said, it is good, but not good enough for me. So build me another palace which will measure my true worth. And that is not good what you have done right now. So Vishwakarma builds another palace, and this time he builds a palace of jewels laden with diamonds and pearls. And Indra looks at this great palace and says, well, this is also good, but not good enough for me. So in both cases, he's saying, you know, the measurement of what you have measured is not quite right.
I measure it very differently, and therefore I want something grander.
Right. And Vishwakarma gets exasperated and he goes to Vishnu. And Vishnu comes to Indra in the form of a little boy and says, I've heard that you've built a great palace. I want to see this great palace. And Indra says, come, I'll show you. And he shows him the palace of gold and he shows him the palace of jewels and says, well, these are good palaces, but they're not as good as I am. And the boy looks at these two palaces and says, well, they're very good, but they're not as good as the palaces of the other Indras I have met. So you see, comparison is being drawn. A reference point is being asked for.
Who are the other Indras?
And who are they? And he says, oh, you thought you were the only Indra? There are as many Indras in this world as there are grains of sand in a beach. Each one assuming that he's great and each one building a palace of his own. So I have seen palaces which are bigger than yours and palaces which are smaller than yours. And each one is aspiring for the next palace. And the scale is of infinity. And your ambition is infinite. And your self-imagination is infinite. And you can never measure infinity.
So in what context are we trying to measure all the daily things that we end up measuring?
Because every measurement depends on a reference point. Right. And your reference point and my reference point may be very different. And people try to come up with objective realities. That, you know, the maid servant can make do with no holidays. But the CEO needs a weekend off. Decide which measurement is okay.
Next week on Business Sutra.
Mahabharata is continuously telling stories, especially when the war happens and later in the episodes. It's always talking about serpents wanting to take revenge 3 generations down the line, 4 generations down the line. The serpents are always against the Pandavas and their children and their grandchildren. There seems to be an eternal raging conflict between the Pandavas on one side and the serpents on the other. And in fact, the story of the Mahabharata begins with a conflict between these two people, and the king says, serpents are bad, kill all the serpents. Until a wise man appears and says, listen, before you kill the serpents, please check why the serpents want to kill you. Go back to your history and you'll realize that to build your kingdom, you took their lands.
To send us your feedback, SMS BizSutra your response or question and send it to 51818. Or you can email us at bizsutra@in.com. And you can watch this episode and the entire series on YouTube.